breaking down the Mountain West football tiebreakers and clinching scenarios. Football championships are only weeks away, so we're back on the Big Mountain to keep you updated. Hey, it's JY back with the Big Mountain. Want to take a close look at Mountain West football, talk about the clinching scenarios for 7 teams right now, as well as the tiebreakers for this league, which just changed 2 years ago. So let's start with the clinching scenarios. We're going to start with the easiest and get to the more difficult ways that these teams can get into the Mountain West championship game. Of course, San Diego State, the only one-loss team in conference, has the easiest path to the Mountain West championship game. They win their final 2 games. They're in. They not only are in, but they will host the championship game down there in Southern California. And there's other ways that other teams can host, but San Diego State absolutely in the driver's seat. Of course, they have head-to-head wins over Fresno and Boise, 2 teams I'm going to talk about later on. But they have that head-to-head loss against Hawaii. Let's talk about UNLV. Kind of have an easier path to get into the championship game here than some others. They need to win their final 2 games and have UNM, Fresno, and Boise lose a game. So one of their last 2, all 3 of those schools need to lose. That's the easiest path for UNLV to get into the championship game. There are other paths as well. I'm not going to break this down by every path. I'm going to give you kind of the easiest path, and that's what that is. Of course, they have a head-to-head win over Utah State, but they have head-to-head losses against Boise State and New Mexico. Let's get to the team they play this Friday, Hawaii. Hawaii's path to get in, the easiest path, is to win their final 2 games and also have Boise, Fresno, or UNM lose one of their last 2 games. That's why, to me, the winner of this UNLV-Hawaii game on Friday has the best shot at making the championship game, whether that's in a head-to-head scenario or a tiebreaker scenario, and we'll get to those tiebreakers here towards the end of this episode. So let's get to the 4th team, Boise State. They have to win their final 2 games and have 4 teams have a loss. Fresno, New Mexico, UNLV, and Hawaii. So a little more difficult here for Boise State to have that direct path because, of course, Hawaii and UNLV play each other. So one of those teams is going to have a loss and one's going to have a win. Then they're really hoping for the team that wins to lose in the last week. So a slightly more difficult path here for Boise State, but they have head-to-head wins against UNLV and New Mexico. They have head-to-head losses against San Diego State and Fresno. Well, let's talk about Fresno State. They, of course, need to win their last 2 games. They also need San Diego State to win out and have UNLV lose one of their last 2 games. So Fresno really relying on some others here in terms of San Diego State and UNLV to have to either win or lose in order for them to have any sort of shot. Head-to-head here, they have Boise and Hawaii as wins, but they do have that loss to San Diego State. One of 2 games that I think has been very key, keeping this a potentially 7-team race, was that Hawaii-Fresno State game. You know, if Hawaii were to win that game, Fresno State would pretty much be out of it at this point, and Hawaii would be in the driver's seat. So that was a huge game for both of those schools as we look towards the championship game. I believe Fresno State has maybe the hardest schedule here for all the teams that I'm going to be talking about. I'm sure you can make arguments for anyone, but they have to play Utah State and San Jose State. And San Jose State, they have a very disappointing season, but they do have an offense that can score some points, maybe cause a little havoc for Fresno. So I would say they probably have what I would call the hardest schedule that they have to get through. Let's talk about the Lobos, New Mexico. They have to win their final 2 games, and San Diego State has to lose to San Jose State and Fresno and Hawaii have to lose. So again, as we're getting down this list, you're getting a lot more and this, and this, and this. They need a lot more help from both San Diego State losing to San Jose State. Of course, they have to beat San Diego State, but then they also need help from Fresno and Hawaii. So it can be done, but they need some help in order to get that done. Of course, their head-to-heads against these teams, wins versus UNLV and Utah State. They have that head-to-head loss to Boise State. The last team we'll talk about is Utah State. Technically, yes, mathematically, they still have a shot at the championship game. They need a lot of help. I'm not even going to go over it here in this episode. They have a shot, but very unlikely. But they can be a spoiler here in the last 2 weeks as they play both Boise State and Fresno State. And Utah State, the Aggies, they could hold some people's championship hopes in their hands as we move through the last 2 weeks. So let's talk about the tiebreakers. Now, the tiebreakers here, obviously head-to-head is always first. Even if it's a 3 or 4-way tie, you would look at that head-to-head scenario. That's going to always win out the day. From there, things have changed in the Mountain West where they're using some metrics as the tiebreaker. They are not using the old BCS computers. So that was used 2 years ago. If you remember, there was a tie and they had to use the computers to do that. Last year, they changed to this new model and they're using these 4 metrics. And these metrics are the SP+, the SOR, the KPI, and Sports Source. 3 of these are publicly available. Those first 3 you can get online. The Sports Source is a subscription-based model. I am not a part of that, so I don't have access to that. But I'm going to throw up a slide here so you can see where everything is at with these 7 schools, and I believe I pulled the right scoring off for all of them. So again, we're looking at the Conley S&P Plus, the ESPN's SOR, the KPI rankings, and of course, I don't have access to the Sports Source, so we're only going to look at 3 to kind of determine on where people are at or where teams are at right now through 12 weeks. Not surprising, San Diego State right there on top. They clear number 1 here as we sit through this 12 weeks of the season. UNLV and Boise are very close 2 and 3. They're averaging as number 2 and number 3, but they're extremely close in that ranking average. There is a gap then as you fall down to that next tier, and I'll group New Mexico and Hawaii and Fresno State very similarly in terms of how they're ranked and their average rank through these 3. So there's clearly a top 3 there at the top. And then Utah State, you see at the bottom, as I mentioned, a very long shot to get in, but they still technically are able to get in. So I wanted to make sure we showed them here. And as I mentioned earlier, that UNLV Hawaii game this week is going to be massive, as well as the Fresno State Utah State. The loser of those 2 games is, for me, going to be out of the running for a Mountain West championship potential game here. So some massive games coming up this week. And then in the final week, we have UNM versus SDSU and Utah State versus Boise State. So a lot of big games coming up in these final 2 weeks. As I mentioned, I think Utah State and San Jose State have the opportunity to play the spoilers here at the end of the regular season. As I had already mentioned, Utah State, as a reminder, plays Boise and Fresno, and San Jose State plays San Diego State and Fresno. And that's why, to me, Fresno has a little bit of a harder schedule here. Not that they're playing one of the top schools, but the 2 schools that they are playing, I think, have a chance to win both of those games. So that's how it breaks down with the tiebreaker. Of course, this is all going to change after this next week's games, and I will bring an update to you next week again as we prepare for the final week of the season. So wanted to get this out to you guys, both the scenarios for every school and what these tiebreakers are potentially looking like. We'll talk about it again next week. With that, smash that like button on the way out and subscribe if you like our content. And I'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.